I'm here with award-winning actor and political poet Addison Witt, who champions democracy through film, literature, and radical reflection. How are you doing today, Addison?
I'm doing very well. It's been a busy couple of weeks, but I am blessed and happy to be here with you this morning.
Most definitely. You're an actor, educator, and a political poet. You have so many different roles. How would you define yourself or describe yourself if like somebody were to ask like what you do?
That is the $64 million question, because I have worn many hats. But, when I began my career over 30 years ago, I would often describe myself as the heart of an actor, the mind of a producer, and the spirit of a director. And so I see myself in different stages of my life. I've been those things, but at my heart, I've always been an actor. I love writing. I've always written. I was a journalist early on in school and loved that. Wrote for newspapers and worked for collegiate papers. That was super exciting. And this work with the film festival has been amazing. And so I love it all. And I've always had a political flair, and very much, I believe being engaged in our political system is incredibly important.
Yeah. You mentioned the film festival. It's you're serving as the chair of the Defense of Democracy Film Festival. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I would be happy to. So I recently relocated to Dallas, Texas from Los Angeles. I had some family matters to attend to and thought this would be a great time to uh, travel here and spend time with my family. And in doing so, I immediately looked for opportunities to get involved in an artistic community. There was the Dallas International Film Festival. I thought, oh, that looks like something to participate in. And I had come across Defense of Democracy while in Los Angeles. I'd written a poem called At Arlington, and it went viral on TikTok, and that exposed me to a lot of people. One in which was a director with the Defense of Democracy named Karen. And after reaching out to me, we connected, and I started attending some of their Tuesday night meetings. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, she mentioned that they had their second annual film festival, Defense of Democracy Film Festival. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And she put the word out and asked who was interested in getting involved. And I thought, you know what, I can participate in that. I've been a part of film festivals in Los Angeles, and and so I jumped in and became the chair of the festival, and it's been incredibly exciting because we've really been able to highlight and amplify the themes that are important to us, such as maintaining our democracy, fighting for it, standing up for the rights of groups and individuals, and fighting for our country. And so this has really been a exciting journey that I have loved getting involved with.
That's incredible. And I think it's, really important, like, when art meets activism. And I feel like, just as far as like the state of the country right now, and you mentioned Dallas, and I would say, like, one of the things I visited Dallas like last year, and I noticed it was really different than LA. You know, just like I feel like that there's a lot more respect, even like take like something like public transportation. Like I feel like a lot of people here don't really pay the fare. They just hop on the bus. You don't see stuff like that in Dallas. They really expect you to pay the fare. Can you talk about the difference like culturally of moving to Los Angeles to Dallas?
I can. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge what you said about artists and activism. It is important that we turn our activism into an artistic way of expressing ourselves in every area, because it's important for artists to speak out. With that being said, you're right. There are some definitely stark differences between Los Angeles and Dallas. Now, truth be told, I'm originally from Texas. I grew up here in East Texas. My stepfather owned a dry cleaning business in West Dallas when I was a child on Westmoreland. And so Dallas has always been a place of roots for me. My family has lived between Dallas and East Texas and have gone back and forth for years. With that said, I did spend 33 years in Los Angeles, and I've just noticed tremendous changes that have taken place here in Dallas. And while there are certain cultural differences. I mean, we do have an ocean, we do have the mountains on one side in LA, and I think people's attitudes about individualism and personal rights in Los Angeles are very different there. As you say, people can kind of jump on buses there and not necessarily pay in LA. Yeah, that is a sidebar benefit to being there. But even with things such as mental health, I remember talking to a physician here in Dallas, and I was talking about mental health, and he says, "Well, you're in a red state, and so mental health is differently here, and your insurance may not pay for it here." I wanted to have someone in the waiting because I had a sister who suffered from MS and has recently passed on, and we laid her to rest, and so I wanted to seek out counseling and grief therapy for that. But some of those things might be a little more challenging here. But I have to say, I really love Dallas. The artistic world has expanded here tenfold. I mean, it's really tremendous what Dallas has to offer in turn. I think their um, artist community and the arts district is one of the largest in the country. It's really expansive, and the filmmakers here have been very open and collaborative. And so I've really enjoyed having access to Dallas in a way that did not exist when I lived here more than 33 years ago.
Yeah, Dallas is an incredible city, and I've interviewed like a number of different artists from the DOC and Junior Boy. And one of the things I noticed, like when I was riding the train in Dallas, and like they have the voice of Erica Badu, I thought that was like really cool. I know that the Defense of Democracy Film Festival is dedicated to amplifying voices of people who stand against book bans, political censorship, and attacks on civil rights. I feel like right now we see, like, with the Trump administration, a number of, they almost seem like, the mascot of those issues. What do you feel are like the most important issues to you personally?
That's a great question, and I agree with what you're saying in terms of this administration seems to uh, really is the complete antithesis of what we have stood for collectively as a nation. I know that there are a great many people that support that administration, and their belief is that the direction is something that they are looking for. But I think as a whole, and certainly from my personal point of view, democracy requires all of us, not some of us. And we are very divided, largely because we have a president that ruled by and through divisiveness. And because of that, his attitude is to divide and conquer, to separate people, to pit people and ideas against each other. And so the body follows the head, right? And because that is how he reigns and rules, he doesn't have a lot of experience, quite honestly, or he didn't have a lifetime of experience as a politician. So, as a businessman who really sought to win at all costs, to really annihilate his opponents, he cannot help but rule in the same manner. But for a democratic nation where people are supposed to work together, the United States, that's really the antithesis of what we believe. It's, you know what I'm saying? Because if he is to divide us and highlight some of the worst characteristics of our nation, then it puts us in a place of great questions, uncertainty, frustration, fighting against each other. So for me, book bans and banning is important. Reading is fundamental. I have said for decades that the educational system in our country has been in decline, massive decline. And if people do not read or know how to read, not everyone's going to go to college or university. And number one, I believe that the United States should support everyone in getting a higher level education, certainly if they want to. That should be fundamental the way it is in other advanced nations around the world. But if that is not the case, then we must encourage reading and thinking broadly, learning. So that's very important. Our fundamental rights, just the freedom of speech, the right to an attorney and due process, very important for our democracy. When we annihilate those things, then we have a person who, he wants to see himself as a king, and that's again because he has no real background in policy, in legislation. He's not an attorney, so he's not advocating on the rights of people and for the rights of people. It's not so much a king, it's just that he only knows how to operate based on his personal experience of running his company, which was mostly run by himself and a small group of family members.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, man. I view him as an incompetent authoritarian. He's basically trying to get rid of constitutional rights, get rid of things like birthright citizenship, and then like, terrorizing, you know, people who weren't born here, specifically, people from Mexico and countries like that. And like, what he did recently, like, he's giving refugee status to these South Africans, is really absurd. And I think people should be more upset about it. But you've written this wonderful book of poetry. And I thought, like, that's really incredible because I I write poetry myself. And I thought, like, that it was really cool. It's called I Stand with the Soul of America. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, well, we are all looking for ways to lend our voices, our platforms in whatever way that we can, and whatever platform we have. It's important to speak up, speak out, and do it often. And for me, I was looking for a way to share my own thoughts about our country, where we are, our democracy, and where I believe it was at risk. And so I look for different ways to share my thoughts. And as a writer in actor in Los Angeles who also writes occasionally, I thought initially I would write a book of monologues. And I was just getting into TikTok, for instance, and thought I had largely been an observer on TikTok. And I thought, you know what? I can write, and I can definitely write some monologues, and I will deliver those over TikTok, and that'll be fun. And I'll get to convey what I'm thinking. And that was largely after the Supreme Court had declared that a president could have complete immunity and do whatever he wanted, which I thought was an outrage. And I thought the Supreme Court was an active participant in dismantling democracy as we know it. And so I began with a monologue, and that led to, in my natural life, I've often been called poetic justice from friends along the way because we get into these great involved conversations, and it's just my way of using language and how I see the world. And when Trump went to Arlington and raised his thumbs and walked across the graves, and I've had many family members that have served in our military since the Civil War, and so I was outraged and found myself writing a poem that went viral, and many people began asking for more. And so I leaned into that and started writing more poetry. And it just, at the time, it came out in a very political way. And so I thought I had to really share my thoughts, and I've just continued to write. And then I wound up publishing the book, I Stand with the Soul of America. And while sometimes we speak as though America is only the United States, we know that it's the continent, right? And so it became much broader to me than only the United States. It's really this entire continent. I stand with us, and the soul of what we've always tried to do, to stand for democracy, to stand as a beacon for others. Now, we all know that we have a lot of our own sins and ills, that we have committed atrocities throughout the world. We know that. But at the heart of what we're trying to get to that center, that place where we can elevate every voice, lift every voice in every person, as Dr. King's vision has been seared into our consciousness, where all Black kids and white kids and brown kids and all kids could one day look up to our nation as an example of what it means to share in equality for everyone.
That's beautiful. And that really touched me personally. Like, I'm a veteran, and I was actually living in Arlington, Virginia, and I had visited Arlington Cemetery the day before President Trump did that. And
Wow.
that like, really, like, I felt like confirmed to me personally, like, that I'm on the right path, and I'm honored to have you here on Zoom virtually. I was really impressed, like, about some of the things you've accomplished, but one of the things that really stood out, you were on an episode of one of my favorite television shows, the reboot of Quantum Leap. Can you talk little bit about your role on Quantum Leap as Lawrence?
Dr. Lawrence. Oh my God, that's really fantastic. I was a big fan of the original Quantum Leap, and love that series. And I am a sci-fi geek. I am a time travel geek, and so quantum physics, all of that, I is a language I love and appreciate. And delving into the cosmos of our universe. So, first of all of that really matters to me, and how we see ourselves. And I work in a lot of commercials in LA and around the country, and that opportunity came up one day. I was very busy. I was working in a couple of commercials, in fact, and I got the audition. It was great. Sent it in, forgot about it, and then I was called and asked to come in and shoot. And I was so busy that week. Those couple of weeks, and I oftentimes have a beard, and I was just cast in another project where they wanted the beard and asked me not to shave. And then Quantum Leap hired me, and we were working around the same time, and they asked me if I could shave the beard. And, because it was a period piece, right? And they wanted Lawrence to have a clean shave. And so it was very difficult. They actually worked with me, and I got to keep the beard. I had to, because of the commitments. But working on the set was a lot of fun. Everybody was really great, and it was at Universal, which when I first moved to Los Angeles 33 years ago, I lived down the street from Universal. And I always love when you have these connections and you can return to your origin, or return to something that mattered to you. And that one certainly mattered to me. I mean, I lived in and around there, and I'd been on the set many times. But, when you have those coincidences, as you said a moment ago, they confirm something inherent in us, that, oh, yes, I'm supposed to be here. But it was a great experience, and I loved it. And it will always be. Unfortunately, the series was canceled, so there is no reprising the role or returning. But I'm glad I got an opportunity to work on that series.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. Just like looking at your IMDb, and you have a lot of other really cool stuff like on there too. But you talk about, like those coincidences, and like you mentioned Universal Studios. Like I went to NIFA, which is actually on the back lot of Universal Studios. So I love that area. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I saw that you also wrote two timely ebooks. One, which is Radical Affirmations. And I'm really big into affirmations. I love affirmations. I think one of my favorite like metaphysical writers is Florence Scovel Shinn. I love Ernest Holmes. Can you talk a little bit about why you wrote the book and the inspiration behind it?
Indeed. So, well, first of all, as I said, I had a sister who had MS, progressive MS, for about 10 years. And she began to decline significantly the last few years. And in traveling back and forth from LA to Dallas, it was important that I, kept myself centered. My mother and brother were her direct caretakers, and so they were in the trenches day in and day out. However, the last several months that I've been here in Dallas, my sister's health began to significantly decline, and the affirmations came and were poured out of that, sometimes spending a lot of time in her nursing home, a lot of time in the hospitals with her. And in the nursing home, my mother and brother and myself would take shifts, and each one of us, my sister, it was important to us that she was never alone. And so we made sure that we were at the nursing home with her. In fact, my mother even checked herself into a nursing home a couple of times to be sure that my sister was not alone, uh, especially because she had lost the ability to walk and move independently. So someone always had to move her, and you can only imagine what that's like being trapped in your body. So radical affirmations came out of caretaking, grief, tremendous love, and using language and ideas to think about what this day is going to present and how I'm going to show up in it, because we don't know from day to day, right? And we have to be armed and prepared. And the word radical, I believe in reclaiming language, and radical, the word radical has been weaponized. And so in the political system, you often hear the radical left, those radical people. And oftentimes there are people that are fighting for just causes. And so radical is often a buzzword throughout history. It wasn't just invented with Donald Trump, the use of it as and weaponizing it. And so I wanted to reclaim it because sometimes it's important to be radical. Sometimes you have to be to get the attention of someone, to stake your claim and to have your voice. And we also look for radical transformations in our lives. Sometimes people are stuck where they are, and the only way to break free is to have a radical transformation. And so radical affirmations became the way of getting there for me, particularly when there were so many challenging circumstances to work through. The other book is called The Phoenix Method. And that one is a 7 day journey of transformation, of taking stock of where we are today and active steps each day for 7 days to reclaim your life. And then you start over. We know that in 7 days, you're not going to have a complete transformation of life, but you are starting the process. And so, with this method here, rising out of the ashes, rising out of the grief, rising out of your circumstances, you can reclaim your life when you're actively making choices and taking the steps to do so.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Couldn't agree with you more. I'm gonna have to check those out for myself. And I was looking on your Instagram, and you post poetry sometimes about like several months ago you posted this poem about P. Diddy, and he's going through like obviously this trial right now, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Someone who at one point, pretty much had achieved the American dream and now like is in this like legal situation. What are your thoughts about it? Do you feel like like there's a lot of people who feel like that there's a little bit of racism like connected to it, like there's people like who would say other people who Hugh Hefner for instance was able and looked at as a hero in society, and he was pretty much doing similar activities. And then you also have the other side of like he's a human trafficker. What do you feel about it?
Well, it is a very provocative conversation. I try to occasionally, like we all do, right? We try to catch the moment, and in those moments that happen in our society, that we all are focused on at the same time, I will occasionally try to write something that speaks to the moment. And P. Diddy is very interesting because he, like a lot of powerful people, become engaged in the underbelly of life, the darker side of life. Many powerful people in general, but powerful people specifically, where there's a lot of money, there's a lot of access, whether that is to illicit drugs, alcohol, and then when you take their own personal trauma that we know nothing about, that comes out in and through the access to whatever means that they enjoy or desire. Racism. We oftentimes in our culture, as people of color, will point to the racism and amplify that when we feel that it's present. The issue with that is racism is always baked into the cake. It's always a part of it. So you can point to the racism, and you can point to the contrast between a Hugh Hefner or others, um, um, Harvey Weinstein, and people who themselves. And I was pretty immersed in Hollywood. I've worked with some very powerful names and people. I was never really invited to those parties because it just were not my scene. And and I represented a lot of child actors. And from the very beginning, it was incredibly important to me that I live the best kind of life that I could, because I represented families, I represented children. So for me, it was a big no to engage in sometimes activities that I was invited to. When you look at why this one is getting away with something or the other is not, I'm a very spiritual person. And so I also look to what is it in their energy? What is it in their life purpose that they need to face? In the, there is, oh, I can't, there's something called the cocoon, right? What is your cocoon? What is it that you have to face in this lifetime? It is the Jewish spirituality. I can't think what that's called right now. It's on the tip of my brain. But anyway, um, I think that what is different for P. Diddy is that he videotaped so much of his experiences. He manipulated people in a way that and was getting into physical altercations uh, that was filmed in hotel rooms. When you take a Hugh Hefner, from what it seemed for me, is that Hugh Hefner, everyone that participated in what he was doing wanted to be there. They agreed to being there. We knew that he had a wife and 1,400 girlfriends, and they all said they wanted to participate. They were very open with what they were doing and what was going on. It was probably, again, similar in terms of illicit usage of drugs, alcohol. There was also their own trauma and abuses that were happening there, but they openly agreed to it. They openly put it in our faces. Whereas with P. Diddy, a lot of it was cloaked and hidden and manipulated and threatened. And there's a great conversation that P. Diddy has with Donald Trump years and years ago. And they were sort of fawning over each other, and Trump was telling him how much he admired him. But each of those men publicly said, there's a lot of crap that they've done. And I think Diddy asked Trump if he would be interested in being the president. And he says, well, I'm kind of interested, but I don't know, because you can't really be the president and do a lot of things that we've done, right? And so you can't get away with that as the president. And it turns out he actually was wrong, because he became the president and he's getting away with a lot of the things that he said he himself should not be getting away with. So, is there a double standard? 100%. We know that there is a double standard. Do people of color have to hold themselves to a higher level and standard because once they get caught doing the same kinds of things that their white counterparts are doing, are they going to be held to a higher standard? Absolutely. Is throwing out racism going to deter that, or point to it in a way where we go, oh, but it's racism, it's not fair? It doesn't matter in this country. It isn't fair. It is racism. But you got caught up doing that when you knew what the potential consequences were.
For sure. And you mentioned being a Hollywood child manager, and it seems that pedophilia is a big problem in Hollywood. Like a lot of people have spoken out, like, previously, like you talk about Corey Feldman. I know, like, he's not necessarily looked at like a necessarily credible source, but Corey Haim, like before he had passed away. And then there's the scandal that happened with Nickelodeon. Like, how do you keep children safe in the entertainment industry? And I've seen things on set, like, they just looked inappropriate sometimes. And I think, like, that there's not really any safeguards sometimes, like, especially like with children. So how do you keep children safe in Hollywood?
Well, I think there are safeguards, and I one of the things I am the most proud of out of all the things that I've done and I've accomplished is that every child on my watch was safe. That is probably the thing I'm most proud of. And the way you safeguard is you tell the parents, as I did, each and every one of them, you are responsible for your own child. And the moment you relinquish that responsibility and you give your child over to Hollywood and you make someone else responsible for your child and your role, you have failed. And so, number one, for me, again, being from Texas, when I went to Los Angeles, I had always worked with children in one capacity or another, and whether it was vacation Bible school, teaching early on, starting to teach acting early on in my career, and I'd work with young people. And so I had a passion for working with young people and being a mentor and elevating them and seeing them go from point A to point Z, take it all the way, get a great education, become a contributing member of society. When I made the decision to represent child actors, I took it very seriously. And in my selection process of finding the right young actor, it was critically important that I also found the right parents, or parent if it was a single parent. And I found a lot of people who were super committed to their children's futures. And we formed a partnership. And ironically, many of those parents trusted me on set. I would drive their children to auditions. I would go to set with them. I would fly with them around the country and the world. And we just didn't have any of those incidents. And that was super important to me. Now, Did people try things? I remember I had an acting studio in Sherman Oaks, and this didn't happen often, I think maybe two times, but I got a phone call once from an adult person inquiring about my acting studio, saying that they were interested in bringing their child to the studio. Well, the line of questions started to become inappropriate, and what he was asking, how much time do I leave the children alone? And I talked about taking them outside to the park on occasion. And he goes, oh, great, they're in this wide open space. And he was just so invested in how much time they were alone and who would have access to them. And I recognized during the conversation this was inappropriate. It didn't feel right to me. And so I ended the phone call, and I just made sure that, and at one time I had 100 students in my acting studio, and I hired great teachers who partnered with me. It was important to those teachers who are still actively teaching to this day in Hollywood. Some of them have very, very successful clients, and those were our core values. So when a parent who is eager to expose their children to Hollywood and get them started as a young actor, they have to truly vet people. They have to understand who are the people that they are putting in charge of their children. And when they say they're going to take them to the set, it's important to question your child when they return. What happened? What are the details? I would tell my parents, you don't let other people take control and you go out to the car and you are an absent parent and you don't know what's going on. There is no amount of money that will be worth it. There is no amount of fame that will be worth it. If or when your child is harmed, there is nothing that's going to make up for it.
Yeah, it's facts. And I think like, that it's really tough, like, for parents, like, to put their kids in Hollywood because, you're leaving them, like, even if like, not necessarily like sexual abuse or something like, as egregious as that, but on productions for children, I feel like they're very harmful. Something could happen like where the child could easily get hurt. But I mean, that could also happen at a playground or any other place. But it's prone to accidents. And I respect you though so much for your actual care and the fact that you cared about those kids, like that were coming to your studio and you work with. And you're doing some amazing work. I recommend everybody to check out your acting website. Like, you actually teach acting classes. Like, for people watching this interview, you want to get some acting classes from Addison Witt, siraddisonwitt.com. And what's next for you?
So, first of all, thank you again for the time and talking with you. I've watched some of your other interviews, and I love your style and way, and I wish the very best for you in your creative journey. For me, right now, there are a few things going on. So, we are in the throes of our film festival. It opens in June 20th, 22nd, 21st and 22nd. It is a hybrid festival, so it's a little bit different, which means anyone can watch it from anywhere because it will be in part online. So that's super, super exciting. We also have people that are hosting the festival in live events around the country. So if someone listening would like to be a host of the Defense of Democracy Film Festival, they can contact us. And I was going to get the number there. Text film to 845-208-9846. If they'd like to be a host, they can certainly do that. And so that's a big thing that's coming up that we're super excited about. And there's some great quality films that are dealing with book bans and school closures and toxic, what we call toxic masculinity and how we find ourselves in it. So there's some really interesting films. For me, I'm also writing a one-man show that I would like to present here in Dallas, Texas, which is largely based on I Stand with the Soul of America. I've written some other poems that are a part of that. And part of that will be infused with my journey from Dallas to Los Angeles and back to Dallas. That's another thing that's going on.